Hello everyone. In this video, we will discuss the difference between Article 128 and Article 280. So dito sa video na ito, pag-uusapan natin ang kaibahan ng violation of domicile at trespass to dwelling. So let's start. Ang unang difference nila ay, dito sa violation of domicile, it is under Title 2, which is crimes against the fundamental law of the state. While ang trespass to dwelling naman ay under Title 9 or crimes against personal liberty and security. Dito sa Title 2, sinasabi nating crimes against the fundamental law of the state kasi they violate some of the provisions of the Bill of Rights. Like for example, unreasonable searches and seizures. Yun yung mga Articles 128, 129, and 130 wherein they violate Section 2 of the Bill of Rights. Tapos, we also have the Due Process Clause, or no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So ito yung mga articles 124, 125, and 126 where an individual is unlawfully deprived of liberty. Kaya natin siya tinatawag na crimes against the fundamental law of the state. Kasi nga yung fundamental law natin ay yung constitutional law natin. Now, ang counterpart ng Title 2 is sa Title 9. Dito sa Title 2 kasi, almost all of the offenders here are public officers and employees. Maliban na lang sa Article 133 which is offending the religious feelings. Dito sa offending the religious feelings under 133, ang nakalagay doon is, it may be committed by anyone or by any person, hindi lamang limited sa public officers and employees. Uulitin ko po, under Title 2, which is crimes against the fundamental law of the state, almost all of the offenders here, yung mga liable dito na crimes are public officers and employees. That is the general rule, kagaya ng arbitrary detention, delaying release, expulsion, violation of domicile, searching domicile without witnesses, crimes against religious worship, interruption of religious worship. All of the offenders there are public officers and employees, except, ang exception dito ay Article 133, which is under Title 2 din. Itong Article 133 ay offending the religious feelings. At ang offender dito ay hindi lamang public officer or employee. Kasi ang nakalagay dito sa Article 133, it can be committed by anyone, which means that it can be committed by any person, not just public officer or employee. Okay, so let's proceed. Now, ito po ang Article 128, which discusses violation of domicile. At ito naman ang Article 280 regarding qualified trespass to dwelling. Para malaman pa natin ang kaibahan nila, let us discuss their elements. So ito po ang elements ng violation of domicile at elements ng trespass to dwelling. So kung titignan natin, ang difference nila is sa element number 1, that the offender is a public officer or employee under 128, pero under 280 naman, the offender is a private person. So ibig sabihin, ang isa pang distinction ng violation of domicile at trespass to dwelling ay, in violation of domicile, the offender is a public officer or employee, while in trespass to dwelling, the offender is a private person. Now, with respect sa Article 128, under number 1, the offender is a public officer and employee, tandaan na the public officers who may be liable for crimes against the fundamental laws are those who are possessed of the authority to execute search warrants and warrants of arrest. Ibig sabihin, hindi lamang basta-basta public officer ka, kundi you must be a public officer who is authorized to execute search warrants and warrants of arrest. Ibig sabihin, part yan ng trabaho mo. And then, let us go to the different acts punished under Article 128. Tandaan na merong iba't ibang acts na pinapunish ang 128. Pero dito sa trespass to dwelling, very specific that he enters the dwelling of another against the latter's will. Pero dito sa 128, maraming acts, entering any dwelling against the will of the owner. So ang kapareho lang ng Article 280 ay, number 1, entering any dwelling against the will of the owner. Pero mas broad pa ang 128 kasi meron pa siyang second and third acts. Dito sa second, searching papers or effects without the previous consent of the owner. Number 3, refusing to leave the premises after having surreptitiously entered said dwelling and after having been required to leave the same. Uulitin ko po, dito sa Article 280 which is trespass to dwelling, iisang act lang ang pinapunish. And that is, pinasok mo yung dwelling ng ibang tao kahit na pinagbawalan ka ng pumasok doon, entering the dwelling of another against the latter's will. Pero dito sa Article 128, violation of domicile, merong 3 acts. Yung una is entering any dwelling against the will of the owner, which is similar to trespass to dwelling, at meron pang additional second and third acts. So sa violation of domicile, merong tatlong acts. Pero dito sa trespass to dwelling, iisang act lang ang pinapunish. Okay, now let's proceed to questions. First question, because of the scorching heat of the sun, the policeman took shelter inside the house of Pedro. Pedro invited him inside and offered him a cold beverage. Maria, the sexy daughter of Pedro, gave the beverage to the policeman. Siguro, dahil sexy nga si Maria, nabighani si police. At dahil doon, parang diniskartehan niya si Maria. The police made a pass on Maria. Nakita siguro ito ni Pedro, kaya nagalit si Pedro. Pedro asked the policeman to leave immediately. Is the policeman liable under Article 128 or violation of domicile? Now let's look at the acts punished under Article 128, violation of domicile. Number 1, entering any dwelling against the will of the owner. Pumasok ba yung police doon sa bahay nila Pedro against the will of the owner? Hindi, di ba? In fact, pinapasok siya ni Pedro at nag-offer pa ng beverage sa kanya. Number 2, searching papers or effects without the previous consent of the owner. Nandoon ba si police para mag-search ng papers or effects? Hindi. Number 3, refusing to leave the premises after having surreptitiously entered said dwelling. So palihim ba na pumasok si police doon sa bahay ni na Pedro? The answer is no. In fact, pinapasok siya ng taos-puso ni Pedro. So in other words, yung ginawa ng police, hindi siya under any of the acts punished under violation of domicile. So ang answer dito is, the policeman is not liable under Article 128. Next question. A policeman who, without a judicial order, enters a private house over the owner's opposition. Is he guilty of trespass to dwelling? So in other words, yung policeman na yon, pumasok siya sa isang bahay over the owner's opposition. At ang tanong dito ay, guilty ba yung policeman under trespass to dwelling? So ano nga ang trespass to dwelling? Sino nga ang offender dito? So ang offender sa trespass to dwelling ay, the offender is a private person or a private individual. Ang police ba ay private individual? The answer is no. Ang police ay a public officer. So in other words, mali ang crime. The crime should be violation of domicile at hindi trespass to dwelling. Kasi trespass to dwelling is committed by a private individual or a private person. Last question. Juan enters the dwelling of Pedro against the will of Pedro. What is the criminal liability of Juan? So what is the crime committed when you enter the dwelling of another against the will of the owner? So pwedeng violation of domicile under 128, pwede ring trespass to dwelling under 280. Ganito sagutin ang tanong na to. The answer is, if Juan is a public officer, then the crime committed is violation of domicile under 128. If Juan is a private individual, then his criminal liability is that of trespass to dwelling under Article 280. Okay, so before we end this video, let us review what are the distinctions between violation of domicile and trespass to dwelling. Sinabi natin na violation of domicile is under crimes against the fundamental law of the state, while trespass to dwelling is under crimes against personal liberty and security. Second, dito sa violation of domicile, it is committed by a public officer or employee, while in trespass to dwelling, the offender here is a private person or a private individual. And then, yung pinakalas na distinction nila ay, dito sa violation of domicile, merong tatlong acts. While dito sa trespass to dwelling, iisang act lang. And that is, he entered the dwelling of another against the will of the owner. So, thank you very much po for watching. Study hard and pray harder. Thank you.